Hello everybody, so this is Bite Size Biology and today we are going to look at the human defense system. So if we're looking at it, the main questions really are asking like to contrast or to compare active and passive immunity, and also the general immune system to an extent. To name and state the functions of the different T cells and the same for the B cells. To distinguish between antibodies and antibiotics comes up quite frequently. Definitions, and then obviously to link to microorganisms, which you can't have one without the other really. So let's get started. 2020 is when it last came up, and so obviously last year, so there is no marking scheme as of yet for this, but we can answer most of us anyhow. So HPV, and look, it goes through all of that, a bit of text there, but I'm going to go straight to the questions. So for I, from which biochemical component are viral coats made from? They're made from proteins, everybody. Okay, viruses are very simple to draw. And part 2, name the other component of a virus, and that would be DNA. You could also say RNA, but you only mentioned one of them. Okay, and finally, next is, why are viruses described as obligate parasites? Well, an obligate parasite is one that cannot reproduce or replicate by itself. So a virus cannot replicate by itself. Describe how virus particles can infect and replicate in host cells. So we've discussed this before in obviously the virus video there. Attachment, entry, synthesis, assembly, release. 5 words in that order with arrows there and you'll be fine. You'll get full marks. Now, what's happening now is V to VII are going to be more in tune with the human defense system. So V, immunity is the ability to resist infection. Name the 2 types of induced immunity. Well, we have passive and we have active. So they are our 2 types. Which of those 2 types, this is your comparison now between active and passive, occurs after a vaccination with the HPV vaccine. So you have to go back up here and you have to read it. And you're told the vaccine contains particles from the viral coat and stimulates induced immunity. Okay, so in that regard then you have to say that the HPV vaccination is active. Okay, because you're giving someone the virus. If it was passive, you were giving someone antibodies to fight off the virus. Give one difference between types of induced immunity that you have named, so active and passive. Well, you can see here, and this is going to come up loads. Okay, active immunity, I'll just highlight it there. The organism, okay, is given a non-lethal dose of the pathogen. And it's important to say non-lethal dose of the pathogen. The body then produces its own antibodies, and it is long-lasting, because part of those antibodies and other cells, the T cells, are the memory cells, the memory T cells. Now, if it was passive, this is where the person is given antibodies made by a different organism. The body then, someone seems to have copied this across incorrectly. Okay, so the body does not produce its own antibodies. Okay, and I'll just refer to that there now. Okay, doesn't produce its own antibodies, and therefore it is actually going to be short lasting because there are no memory T cells present. So active immunity is long lasting, passive immunity is short lasting. Active immunity, the body produces its own antibodies. Passive immunity, the body doesn't produce its own antibodies. It is given them by a different organism. Okay, moving on. So 2019, you're asked to write a note on vaccination, and actually for 2018, you're asked something similar to write a note on something else. So what is a vaccination? Essentially what it is, guys, is it's active immunity. And this is obviously very relevant today with COVID-19. So a vaccination is active immunity, and the organism is given a non-lethal dose of the pathogen. the body then produces its own antibodies, and it is long lasting. 2018. Give a detailed explanation for why active immunity results in a long-lasting immunity. Well, all you have to do is refer to the memory T cells. The body produces its own antibodies, which contain memory T cells. And then you're also asked in there to give a biological explanation for why antibiotics should not be prescribed to directly treat influenza. Well, even if you didn't know what influenza was, what type of microorganism it was, you should have an idea about antibiotics. Antibiotics are not effective against viruses. So if they should not be prescribed to treat influenza, well then obviously influenza is a virus. Antibiotics are only good against Monera, bacteria, or even fungi. Okay, 2017, so an outbreak of measles occurred in Ireland in summer of 2016. Name a group of people who would be most at risk to this outbreak. Well, there's a load of different types of people there. You've got babies, which will have obviously a less developed immune system. You've got people who are not vaccinated, and you've got people with weak immune systems. What is a vaccine, and how does it result in immunity? A vaccine is as we said, it's active. It's active immunity, so it is a non-lethal dose of a pathogen, and this causes the person to produce its own antibodies. We're seeing this answer come up again, and again. Now, part 3. List any 3 types of the T lymphocytes active in a human immune response. Now, there are 4 in total. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to list 4 of them and also describe 4 of them as well. But you only need to do 3 of them. So you've got your helper T cells. I might highlight these there now. Helper T cells, everybody. What exactly does that do? It recognizes antigens and it produces the killer T cells. You've got the killer T cells, so obviously they do what they say they do. They kill or they attack the infected cells. And they use something called periphonin there. Basically what it does is it puts holes in through the cell membranes or the cell walls. The suppressor T cells stops the immune response. This is really important because we don't want the body consistently producing all of these killer T cells the whole time, because that takes up energy. So we need to stop it. It's like if you were at home and in the morning you turn on the lights, but eventually you will turn off the lights when it's bright enough to see without them. So the suppressor T cells realizes or recognizes that the threat is gone. It stops the immune response. And finally then, the memory T cells. These are what are responsible for the long-lasting active immunity. And they remember the antigens for long-term response. So it means if you come in contact with that disease again, the body is going to be more adapted to overcome it. It will produce killer T cells a lot quicker. Okay, 2015, outline how a named feature of the human general defense system works. So this doesn't come up too often, but the main one really is the skin. It is a physical barrier to pathogens. There's more than this, but that's the main one. Name 2 organs in the human body that are specific to the immune system. So there's a few there. You've got your lymph nodes. Remember, lymph nodes produce lymphocytes. You've got your thymus, so that's located there in the endocrine system. You've got the spleen and you've got tonsils. Just learn it off, to be honest. You only need 2 of those. Distinguish between an antigen and an antibody. So you can see here that my antigen is a foreign particle that causes an antibody response. So if something enters the body that was not made there and obviously should not be there, okay, we refer that to as antigens. And then our antibodies, as we've said that before, is a chemical or a protein, to be precise, that is produced in response to an antigen. And that's it. Underneath it, you're asked for the specific roles of the killer T cells, helper T cells, and name the T cells that stop the immune response. So we've done that already. Helper T cells, they recognize antigens, they produce killer T cells. killer T cells, they attack the infected cells, and obviously suppressor T cells are what stop their immune response. Okay, again, we're seeing the same questions over and over again. Distinguish between antibodies, antibiotics. So I'm not going over that again. In relation to antibodies, distinguish between active and passive transport. Well, we've been through that again. I need to fix this because I just copied and pasted it. Obviously, oh no, it's actually correct. Short-term passive is antibodies are given to a person, short-term protection. Active is antibodies are made by the body, long-term protection. Grand. Now, it's part 3 that I wanted to focus in on. Using a knowledge of antibiotics and bacteria suggests why a person is more likely to pick up an infection in a hospital than at home. Well, that's because hospitals contain sick people, which means there's going to be a greater quantity of pathogens about. And if you're in a hospital, you're going to be increased chances of in contact with these people. And also, you often hear of hospitals getting outbreaks of antibiotic resistant strains. So it's definitely better to stay away from hospitals as much as possible because the risk is actually quite serious. Okay, we're almost finished now, guys. 2012. 2 ways other than colours white blood cells differ from red blood cells. Okay, bioconcave, no nucleus. But it's part 2 and part 3 that I wanted to go on to. Name a group of white blood cells other than lymphocytes, monocytes. And then for lymphocytes are divided up into B cells and T cells. B cells produce antibodies. That's correct. What is the role of antibodies? They recognize and inactivate antigens. So antibodies recognize and inactivate antigens. Name 3 types of T cell and state what their functions. Well, look, we've done this before, okay? And I think this is the last question now. It is. Okay. So, what is meant by the term immunity? Immunity is resistance to infection. That's it. I'll briefly outline the B lymphocytes in the human immune system. The B lymphocytes, all they do is they recognize antigens and they produce antibodies. That's it. Don't overcomplicate that one. Distinguish between active and passive immunity. Well, we've seen that already. Vaccination gives rise to active immunity. Explain the statement. Well, a vaccine is a non-lethal dose of the pathogen, and therefore this person produces its own antibodies. Long-term protection. Now, in certain situations, a person is given a specific antibody rather than being vaccinated. Is this an active or passive immunity? It is passive because the person is being given an antibody created by a different organism. Under what circumstances might an antibody rather than a vaccination be given? Well, if the person already has the disease and they're not coping very well, well then they're going to obviously need a helping hand here. So they're given the antibodies then. So a person is already infected and the body might not be responding well to it. So we give them the antibodies. Part 3. Comment on the duration of the immunity that follows after by being administered the antibody. It's short term. Okay, and just refer to that there are no memory T cells being produced. So that was a really neat question, really. So doctors and scientists, they would prefer people be given vaccinations rather than antibodies, simply because the body becomes a bit more adept and more able to deal with it. And it's longer lasting, of course. That's it, guys, for the human defense system. A lot of students seem to skip this chapter when they're studying because it's not considered to be one of the big chapters, but it does come up, as you can see. The good news is, though, when it does come up, the questions are very repetitive, and a lot of it's just learning off. So it's definitely well worth doing if it does come up in your exams. Okay, everybody, best of luck.